Hey, thanks for checking out The Nikhil Hogan Show. If you like the content, you can subscribe to it on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, or Facebook. I'm also writing a book on music education called Why Children Quit Music, and you can check out my website, nikhilhogan.com, for updates on when it's going to be released. If you're a parent who's interested in learning how best to help your children learn music, you can check out my company, songbirdmusicacademy.com, and there are a ton of free articles, links, and resources for Neapolitan Parlamento-based learning, and also the Barry Harris method if you're interested in learning jazz. Now, let's get to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nikhil Hogan Show, bringing you in-depth music conversations with some of the best musicians in the world. My guest today is internationally acclaimed pianist, organist, harpsichordist, composer, conductor, and improviser, Dr. Rudolf Lutz. Lutz was organist of the church St Laurenzen in St Gallen from 1973 to 2013, and conductor of the Bach-Chor at St Gallen from 1986 to 2008. Lutz is a former lecturer of improvisation at the Schola Cantorum Basiliensis and has taught thorough bass at the School of Music in Basel and oratorio studies at the Zurich University of the Arts. A respected composer, Lutz's Sinfonia for Cantata BWV 158 by Bach and his Christmas oratory and English Christmas are critically acclaimed. In 2017, his cantata in homage to Luther, a work commissioned by Deutschlandfunk Kultur, received its world premiere at Wartburg Castle. In 2018, his second cantata, based on a traditional Swiss hymn, also received its premiere. Lutz is the artistic director and conductor of the J.S. Bach Foundation. Their choir, orchestra, and vocal soloists are in the process of performing the complete vocal catalog of Johann Sebastian Bach, performing 12 cantata concerts a year, and this massive undertaking is estimated to conclude in 2027. I should mention that all introductory workshops, concerts, and reflective lectures on the cantata texts are recorded and made available for free on the Foundation's Bachipedia platform. Dr. Lutz, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
The same. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Before we jump in, may I ask, how old were you when you came to music?
I think we had our piano just in the dining room, and I was always trying to play the songs. My mother, my grandmother, they were very musical, but not professionals. They sang with me and to me. I remember one little sequence, which I might perhaps tell you, Mr. Hogan. We had Peter Pan. My grandmother, my mother sang Peter Pan and accompanied themselves, and I loved the Hana Gana Manda, what makes the red man red. Perhaps you know the tune. Anyway, I was capable of, I think I must have been 4 or 5, but I can't really recall that anymore. I remember I tried to play Hana Gana Manda. That wasn't difficult. That's that was with the thumb and the fifth finger, and afterwards I tried to play with the right hand, and that wasn't too difficult. But getting those together, imagine the rhythm isn't quite the same. But that brought me out, and I had problems, and I remember so much. I was angry, furious I wasn't capable of doing it. I smashed the lid of the piano, and my mother came in, and I wasn't quite happy about that. But I tried it and tried it and tried it once again. And I think if I want to bring it to a point, what is very important for improvisation is that you have this idea, I want to have that on the piano or on the violin or on the saxophone, which I hear, which I would love to be able to play. That's about one of my first memories I have in improvisation. So I played piano at home, and then with 8, I remember my parents thought, okay, we should send Rudy to a piano lesson. So I was surely working for 3 or 4 years on my own, trying to play, listening to my grandmother, admiring that she could sing and play the piano at the same time.
Well, Dr. Lutz, do you have absolute or perfect pitch?
No, not at all.
I bet you were using your ear from the beginning.
I think so. Yeah. It was, let's say I've got an idea where a do is, a re, a mi, but not in the way of exact pitch, but I've got the feeling for a key. So I know which is the ground note, which is the fifth note, which is the third, the major, the minor, and things like that.
And so how did that first piano lesson go at 8?
Oh, I don't remember. I think I just had to learn notes and see where the C. I think it was a very traditional piano teacher. He came from Vienna, worked in St Gallen, and he had his methods. He had his little booklets. I played Gretchaninov. I played the little pieces prepared. So actually, no improvisation. I remember my grandmother always, she was the great person in my life for music. She always says, come on, Munkum, that was my nickname, Munkum, come on to the piano, we'll play for 4 hands. And we did a lot of duets. So I learned a lot of sight reading with my grandmother in those first years. But we also tried, of course, to sing our spirituals. My brother and me, he played ukulele, I played the piano, we both sang, little David, play on your harp, hallelujah, hallelujah, little David, play on. We loved Golden Gate, we listened to it and tried to play it. Actually, something jazz musicians do is an absolute normal situations. I did it for classical music. Of course, I tried to compose a little. That my teacher wasn't too bad as me. When I brought my compositions, he estimated that and showed me how the periods was. He explained a few things about harmony. He showed me about doubling notes and all those things. So I had, I would say, a conventional way of learning piano, very average.
When did you start composing and improvising?
I think I started improvising when I was 4, just playing and doodling on the piano, and I started composing. Yes, I remember a very nice little thing. My aunt, my great aunt, she was the sister of my beloved grandmother, Auntie Nora. She played a lot of jazz, Kitten on the Keys. She told me about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Of course, always with a little snigger in her voice. And I think I wrote a few notes on a paper. It was nothing, and then she said, oh, that sounds lovely. And then she played a beautiful English march on it. And I said, did I really compose that? And she said, yes, you did. And this beautiful lie brought me to the moment that I thought, why shouldn't I, when I was about 7 or 8, try to make a little piece for my grandmother. I still remember the piece.
So it appears to me that it wasn't only classical music. You had other influences growing up. You were listening to other things. Could you mention the things that you were listening to growing up?
Well, definitely. I was listening to a lot of things. We had an old recorder, a gramophone. We listened to the comedian harmonists. Ich wollte, ich wäre ein Huhn, dann hätte ich nichts zu tun. Ich legte jeden Tag ein Ei und wäre die ganze Woche frei. We listened also to Schubert, Winterreise. I remember it was Fischer Discow with Gerald Moore, Am I Too Loud? Very fine. And my brother, when he was 4 or 5, he stood onto the table of the kitchen and sung like a nightingale in love. It was so sweet. My parents, of course, admired things like that. He was also accompanied by my grandmother. I would say it's this old-fashioned way of making music. You haven't got a radio, you haven't got a recorder, you haven't got an MP3 player. You just have to do it by your own. If you wanted to have a dance music, you said, come on, Rudy, sit at the piano and play dance music for us. I always loved all sorts of music. And I remember my first record, my first LP I bought with my own money, with sour-earned money, was Louis Armstrong. I'm going to lay down my sword and shield. And then, of course, we always trying to play it. And I think I learned improvising by wanting to also play it and not always having the lead sheet or the music sheet to read it.
How did your Viennese piano teacher, how did he react to your wide, eclectic palette of music?
I didn't show him everything. I don't even remember. He was a bit a strict man. He was a fine teacher. I also, after a few years, started with theory. So I learned Louis Twill, the old method he had learned from his professor, and I imagine his professor had learned it from another professor, and perhaps that professor must have been a pupil of Mendelssohn or something like that. Anyway, this old-fashioned tradition of doing fine voice leading, theory, harmony.
Wait, could you repeat, what was that term you used to refer to this method?
Louis Twill.
Oh,
Louis
what is that?
Louis, I think it was, it's not a method, it was a composer and theory man. Louis, I don't remember his pre-name, and Twill was also one of those, and they had together, they built up a treatise of harmony about, I think it must have been end of the 19th century, something about like that. And it's very, very conventional theory, like one learns it. Still learns it sometimes in the conservatory.
Wonderful. And so, could you just describe your music education into your teenage years and then into your university days?
I loved to also play football and cricket and things like that, jumping around outside with the kids. I had to practice. I had to play the piece twice. Every day, twice. That was sufficient. I was fairly quick in uptake. I could read fine. And then, with 11, I was asked by my school teacher, primary school teacher who worked in church, if I would like to accompany the kids' services on a piano. And I said, yes, I want to. And so I remember I couldn't read hymns with all the 4 parts, but my mother had to play them for me, and after 2 or 3 times I was able to play it. So I had a very fine ear of realizing how things go. And then I was in church, and then I also thought it would be lovely to play organ.
When did you pick up the organ?
Oh, also something about 11 and 12. I had a blind organ teacher. He was fine. He showed me a lot of Bach. He let me, of course, learn the pedals. It's also a technical approach. But I remember when I brought little compositions, he was interested in it, and he showed me how to get them better, and voice leading problems. Of course, everything together, theory, studying piano pieces, playing the inventions from Bach and a bit of Brahms, and then afterwards Beethoven, of course, Mozart. I started to have a look behind the music. So I was always very interested in actually an analytical approach, but not only an analytical, but also how does this music go? How does it function? I got an organ position with the Lutheran Church. There you have to sing everything. It was very hard for me to accompany because my clergyman always started to sing and didn't wait till I gave him his notes, and so I had to transpose.
Right.
My teacher in the high school for learning to be a school teacher, because my father said, come on, you have to first, if you want to be a musician, that's okay, but first you have to have an ordinary and normal and fine profession. So they thought, okay, the best would be to be a teacher. I worked as a teacher 2 or 3 years, and I really love kids, and I enjoyed that too. But after a time, I then said I'm going to the high school, the university, the Conservatorium in Winterthur.
And where is that? Is that also in Switzerland?
That's in Switzerland.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about 80 kilometers from St Gallen, near Zurich. I would say perhaps that's known.
Quick question, Dr. Lutz. How many hours did you practice a day?
Oh.
Were you a hardworking person?
I was, I would say I am now a hardworking person. Sometimes I was very hardworking. Sometimes I was just enjoying my gift because I could do it with left, how you say in Swiss. But I also practiced, and I had a very interesting piano teacher, a fine organ teacher. Yes, organ I practiced more. And piano, after a time I realized, you have to practice these big sonatas, Schubert B flat and things like that. And I had a strict, good, very good piano teacher, Rudolf Lutz from Salzburg. He was always a bit offended because I sometimes doubled the third, which Schubert hadn't doubled. And then he said, "Mr. Lutz, are you really sure that you know it better as Mr. Schubert?" And I said, "Sorry, I didn't even realize it because I had to play by heart. I was improvising, of course, myself." And
were you always improvising even in your undergraduate days? Was that a tradition you just kept going?
And of course, as an organist, you need improvisation. They say little 1 minute piece between there from this to this key. Could you do that? Could you make a nice little prelude for? I need here a little meditation. And I think as an organist, you just have to be able to improvise. And if you listen to Catholic organists who do that the whole time, because you really fill in the time, you hear very many organists who improvise, but sometimes the level is really shocking. It's got nothing to do with music. And
well, are you talking specifically about organists who don't improvise, or maybe at a lower level?
Well, they think they improvise. They do it. They doodle along, and they've got no formal feeling. They've got no harmonical feeling. The motifs just come like it. It always sounds the same. You know, the cliches is a real problem. Very interesting as thematic. The cliches. You know the word, yes. I imagine. It's known because it's not. I didn't know if it's also in English known. You need cliches to improvise. You have to have things in your hand which just function by itself. But if you just only let that go, then it's doodling. It's not really painting. It's not immediate painting of that what you really hear. And that's of course then another question I would like to answer when you say how does one
yes, I'm going to lead to that.
Teach?
Yes,
but I imagine that will come in a later moment. I anyway remember I was always trying to express myself. I was of course also very full of energy and full of pride. I could improvise because nobody really improvised at my times. It was my teacher said improvising is not serious. And I said, "Oh, okay, so I have to work hard on my theory."
Dr. Lutz, did you have any inspiration, did you know anyone who improvised that you could learn from, or did you have to self-teach yourself?
I was an absolute self-teacher, yeah. I tried out. I had, of course, then very interesting theory teachers, composers, Roland Moser from Basel, Winterthur. He showed us a lot of very detailed and analytical show, not really mathematical, but with an insight. Where's the poetry of the music, and how does Beethoven do it here, and look what happens here. I remember we worked on the second, the two-part Inventions from Bach a whole year, Thursday afternoon from 2 to 4. We had a group, and we played them, incredible, and we once did Debussy, the Preludes, and we also always had to play it, and he explained it for us, and I learned an incredible lot. The structural, motivical up-build of Bach's pieces. I learned it with him. And I, of course, in improvising, also tried to do things like that. Let's say Orgelbüchlein, with the motives which always come in other harmonies. I understood what's happening, and of course I tried it myself, and I saw how damn difficult it is to really get that those figures right, and getting them also in a fine counterpoint to the others. How's the bass with the second voice? How's the bass with the third voice? How's the cantus firmus with the second voice and with the bass? And and I did it without methods.
That's interesting. So I'm sure you must have taken counterpoint in theory in university. Did that have any influence in your compositional or improvisational self-starting method?
Yes, of course. Everything which people told me what happened, and I sort of realized it, I said I'll try to do it, I'll also do it myself. So actually, if you think what Bach writes in his Orgelbüchlein and Bach writes in the preface of his of his inventions. He says it's to learn how you make nice inventions. It's how to work with those inventions. It's the way of the cantabile playing. It's also a piano method, and it shows you rhetorical examples how you can find a new way of speaking, as the effect, the expression of a piece, and have a look at it. If you study it, fine. You will learn how to be a composer and an improviser, because I think in the time of Bach and his colleagues around, composing, improvising, performing, everything was the thing together. That was then after a time also our idea at the Schola Cantorum to say, why not, if we work on historical ideas, how you did it those times, also say, put the improvisation and the composition in the middle of the education and work out pieces, play the pieces, write pieces, copy pieces, understand how the others did it, learn from the others, look at the pieces. It's not mainly only play the pieces, but also understand what other composers do. And that took me a lifelong time to do it. And I must say, it's of course marvelous if one can give young musicians this way of learning, and that's already jumping into the next section, but I'll go back again.
No, I'm really interested in that. And so just to finish up with the education then, so what did you do did you do your master's and your doctorate? What was that? What work was that in?
I did a normal, nowadays you call it a master in piano, a master in organ. I had a master in theory also after a long time, and then I started working at the University of Winterthur, the conservatorium called, and I taught theory, I taught solmization, I taught. Right.
Were you fully formed as a? When did you feel fully formed as an artist, as a player? Did you? I'm sure it's a lifelong journey, but was there? Was there a certain point where you felt, I feel mature now? When did you have that sensation?
No, never. I always had the feeling I'm learning by doing. I always had the feeling the next challenge is the next interesting job I got. And then I was normally very young. I was my students were 20, 22. I was about 23 or 24, only their teacher.
Wow.
Yeah, and we had a fine time together, and I tried to give them everything. And sometimes I was a bit too fast. So I learned also the methods of teaching and in realizing I'm a bad teacher, so I have to do something, I have to change something. And then it went on and on. Then I got a few possibilities to be a choir conductor, but I had no experience. They just said, you do it. You're a nice man. And I wasn't always very a nice man. I sometimes get very furious. I was a bit impatient. Now I got a bit older and wiser, I hope.
Well, I am so excited to ask you about your pedagogy then. So,
please.
So you mentioned solmization. So you do solmization, you do solfege. Do you do, I'm curious, do you do fixed do, movable do, numbers? How do you teach
Normally movable do, and our methods was movable do, like the Hungarian methods. And my idea was, of course, knowing where you are. I could also work with numbers. I could say, now you see, we transpose. We go from C major, and then it goes on. So you see, now we're in the dominant. Now the G is now no more the do, but it's now it's no more the sol, but it's now the do, and things like that, and helping the people through harmonies, through understanding the basso continuo. I would say the thorough bass is perhaps something of the most important thing for classical music, not only for Baroque, also for Mozart, also for Beethoven. I would even say for Brahms. Perhaps Wagner jumps off, and of course Debussy jumps off, but you can still sort of work with those methods. You just have to adjust them.
Is organ playing different from country to country? Does the French organ tradition have differences with the Swiss and the German and the Italian? Is there differences in the way you learned?
You mean in playing literature or playing basso continuo?
Anything.
Anything.
The improvisation, language, harmony, although those sorts of things.
Yes, of course. I studied Baroque French organ music quite thoroughly, especially the sort of middle period, Bonvin and Clérambault, perhaps a little bit, and also Couperin. And of course, you find very specific ways of using the same ideas. It's from composer to composer different. It's from period to period different. And that's, of course, one of the very, very interesting studies in improvisation. If you say, I would like to learn the method of Louis Couperin. You haven't got books about it, but you have his music, and you can study it. You can say, how does the thorough bass go? How is the voice leading? How is the ornamentation? How are the periods? How is the development of the form? How are the harmony? How is the harmony schedule? How does it go with the points of modulation and all those things? Everything you study about music, when you want to learn it for improvisation or for composition, you just have to have a very exact look what's happening. And my work, let's say as a professor in Basel at the Schola, I had a few very fine students who studied master improvisation. There I accompanied them. We did a lot of playing of those pieces. They did style copies. We looked at it. We compared it. We said, or why did you do that? Why did you do that? Where do you find that? What do you find? Can you build in this part of Louis and all those things? And after a time, I think it takes a few years to understand the style of composer. It's not the way I start, by the way. This is now the absolute pitch, the high level, the summit of improvisation. I would first begin with thorough bass and with chorale. Perhaps I can try to point that out afterwards. But let's say if you really want to see the difference between all these composers of the same period, in other countries you really find national styles, and you can't define them. In the best composers are so individual. They work in the style. I mean, if you think Bach, he works so much with ideas which Pachelbel developed, which Buxtehude developed, and you can't say he really invents completely new things. But what he does with the material, that's incredible. And trying to point that out. Also, that I'm doing with my Bach Society, I'm trying to show my musicians, look what happens here. Isn't that incredible? How he develops that. What does he do here? And in improvisation and composition, it's like finding those things, but then after it comes into me as a personality. And if I've been doing this for years or decades, I got this sensitivity, which helps me to find my own solutions.
Let's go to that basso continuo and thorough bass. So what text did you use? Did you use text or did you orally teach? Did you look at what scores did you use when you were teaching over there? Well,
thorough bass. On the one hand, I just had to teach thorough bass for the choir students. They had to play their little pieces. So there I had to do actually not really very much creative work, but I always try to show them, look here, the voice leading of the 7 going to the 6, this is this, and this is this, and the chorale the same. So basso continuo was sort of a basic work where people could learn harmonical models. So I didn't only let them play pieces. I said, come on, we'll play nice cadence. We take a half cadence. We do a cadence with a Trugschluss. That's 6th degree. I don't remember the English word for it. I showed them models. I said, find the models in the pieces you're conducting. So I said, take your choir piece by Schumann and write a general, a thorough bass on it. and it functions. And they say, I understand it. That's interesting. So the harmonical aspect, which also brings a horizontal aspect into music by the voice leading, which is also very important with a thorough bass, but it's also chords, it's both together, gave me the possibility to show them what's happening in the pieces you are playing. And in my education with my students, I always tried to. You had those students who didn't want to play the thorough bass. They said, I want to play trumpet, I want to play bassoon, I've got other things to do as this rubbish. And I always tried to catch them, and I say, now we'll take your bassoon concerto by diddle-de-dum, and we'll have a look at it, and let us find models which you have to afterwards play. And then they learned for their bassoon concerto, for their harp concerto, for their violin concerto, and then they were more interested, and they worked a little more. And I know after a time, if you do this playing of Generalbass thorough bass on the piano, you sort of like it. It's a sportive, nice feeling if you get along and if you understand it.
Okay, if somebody wanted to work on thorough bass, what would you tell them to do?
I would say it depends on how's the piano playing. If it's somebody who can't play piano, then I would say I learn a very nice cadence, which is simple but sounds nice. Not this terrible ba 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 like everybody had to learn.
Right.
I would make one little nice thing which sounds like Bach, and say, okay, now you play this. You play it in this key. Now, when it functions, you go to the dominant. You play it in the minor. I remember, because in the Baroque, in the high Baroque period, a piece which, let's say, starts in C major normally goes to the dominant G major. Sometimes it goes to the sixth degree A minor. Sometimes it goes to D minor. You've got a subdominant F major, and perhaps you've got a third degree E minor. So I always let them transpose these little models to the main keys a piece can go to. And of course I show them then the inventions and say, look, Bach does exactly the same as you. And that gave them sometimes motivation to practice.
Okay, so cadences first, and what happens after cadences?
Then progressions, little sequences, the Italian fifth sequence, a 5/6 sequence. It would be hard to explain all these things. A 7/6 going down. There are about 8 main little sequences you find in the Baroque part. Always with the goal that I say, now you go and look at your Baroque pieces you're practicing and find the same phenomena. And they say, look, I found a cadence. Look, I found a sequence. And I can say, you see, a cadence is like a dot. When a phrase is finished, you put a dot. And I could also do basic rhetorical ideas. That's, of course, also a great help to understand the music you are playing.
So, Dr. Lutz, you mean to say that you could actually look at a piece by Bach and you could actually break it down in a way that is easy to communicate to a musician who understands cadences, thorough bass, basso continuo, and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So you can open up the well-tempered clavier and just break down any piece in there.
Yes, any piece. There are sometimes a few problems you have to solve, but especially when you see you can't break it down to the easy things. You can say, what's happening here? I've got a problem. I don't understand. And so I can have a look at it. And of course, if I'm a coach, I can go through with my students, and I could have also taught them piano playing. In not really playing the piece, but also firstly understanding what's actually happening. Where are the incisions? Where have you got the parts of rhetorical upbuild? The form, not you say a form is like this. It has a first theme, it has a second theme, it's got a transition where you learn how it has to be and you have to find it. No, you look at the piece and say, what's happening? First, where are the cadences? That's the most important. Where have you got the progressions? Where have you got modulations? What happens? Where does what happen? And then have a look at it, and then afterwards say, oh, can I get this into my interpretation? I'm, of course, absolutely convinced if you want to be a whole musician, a full musician, you have to really start with these things. Have a band, work with others together, make your own music, do folk music, do anything, doesn't matter what, but do it seriously and have a coach who helps you with all these things. And of course, when I was a teacher, I always tried to explain to my students not only what they had to play, but how they could understand what is behind music.
Okay, so I have another question, which is, okay, let's say you understand the general breakdown. How do you then build up a vocabulary of, I guess the Italians would say, diminutions or making patterns and, in different rhythms? And what's a good way to build up that vocabulary?
It all depends. You would, speaking now from diminution is a very interesting an interesting thing, especially for prima pratica music of, let's say, from the 15th to the 16th century, Pretorius, Palestrina, Josquin des Prés. You've got those simple vocal items you sing, and the diminutions were done sometimes vocally, sometimes also done with the instruments. So you've got da dee da 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 dee da da da. How do you connect one note with the other? It's actually ornamentation. That's of course very, very stylistic on that period. Of course, also if you want to say the Bach style, which I'm the specialist, uses things like that. You can call that diminution. Let's say if you've got a chorale, be da da dee dee dee. If you take this note, ba ba, you can do ra ba da da dee da ya da 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 dee da 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 dee da da dee 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 da da dee dee da da da. It's
amazing. You take those simple notes and then you add all these notes in between.
Yeah, and then you know figures like ba da 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 dee 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 dee. Those four notes, because in Greek it's called tetra. You call that a tetrachord. And then I explain the tetrachord. I do the figura corta. Actually, it doesn't matter what you call it. Of course, I try to find the stylistic right words, but you could also call it a mordent, ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum, da-da-da-dee. You could call it a slur. You could call it anything. You could call it a monica. You could call it a Rudy. It doesn't matter. Just that you recognize it. And then I always go to the music and say, let us have a look at Pachelbel numbers, this and this. Do you find any tetrachords? And then they go and say, I found tetrachords. And this is like looking for gold nuggets. It's lovely. When the students find it, they are happy. And that was always my goal, to make them happy, not about me, but about the music. And if I remember how we were analyzing a Bach chorale with a group of mine, was fairly young, and we were looking at it. We were getting quiet and quiet and quiet. And I remember the tears in the eyes of my students, also in mine, when we said, isn't this a great composer? And I think if a teacher is enthusiastic about it and does it from his own point of view, knowing more about music as only how the right notes have to be played, but also understanding the music, how it goes from the harmony, from the voice leading, from the motivical work, from the composition, really being an expert, nicht Kunsthandwerk, but Kompositionshandwerk. You know the word, that means not the art of composition, but the craft, the handcraft, the making of music. I think then, if that happens, then the students might really have a kick for their life to also be searchers and looking for how does music function, and not only being afraid of the mistakes they play. Of course, that's a real problem. I mean, I understand anybody who wants to have a good career as a musician. So they have to practice. And that's okay. But I mean, if you understand what's happening, you have a much better way of practicing.
In 2007, Dr. Robert Gjerdingen released a book called Music in the Galant Style, which talked about the Italian Parlamento tradition and his musical logical innovations of schemata. What's your take on schemata? And because I've heard you talk about musical Legos, like bricks, Lego bricks.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I see a lot of parallels between those.
Absolutely. I met Bob, that was about a few years ago. No, I imagine it's more than a decade. And I was enthusiastic about his lecture. He showed us how the gallant music is possible to understand through schematical ideas. And I immediately said, yes, you're doing the same as I. And I bought the book, I worked the book through, and we used Gjerdingen method in our school, especially when we did gallant music, and of course also for Mozart and Beethoven. You can really build it up. So I would say it's a fine way of understanding the music, and it's very interesting. You can capture the form much better if you've got those Gjerdingen schemes.
So I was intrigued about Switzerland and what is going on in Switzerland, where you have these, you have all these improvising, composing musicians coming out of Switzerland. And where does that come from?
Well, I would say I think it comes from the Schola Cantorum Basiliensis. I remember I was asked in 1990 by my predecessor, Rudolf Meyer, who had done a bit of improvisation at the Schola, to be his successor. And I remember that was a very miserable little amount of lessons they had. The organists were allowed to have 6 Saturday afternoons. That was everything, nothing. So I said to Dr. Reidemeister, he was the director at that time, I said, now, Peter, sorry, if you want me to teach improvisation, you must give me single lessons for my students. I can't do it. And then he said, oh, yeah, okay. And then we started, and I built up a little method, and we tried to find forms, we tried to find models. I did it by experience, by my own experience. And I had very interesting communications with the students who asked me a lot of questions I didn't understand about voice leading, so I learned a lot from my students. And after a time, it was a nice little garden with a few little flowers coming up, and we were successful with that. Peter Reidemeister was happy about it. Also, my colleagues were happy about it. They said, I think that might be something. And after a few years, we said, now we'll try to build out this course. I will do a master class. I will have one master student. That was Emanuel Ludivelek. Now he's professor in Hanover, also very good improviser. Sorry, that was saying that I was a good improviser. Selbstrum stinkt, we say in Swiss, but we'll leave that out. Don't say how great you are. But Emanuel Ludivelek was my first student, and we couldn't even make a diploma, so we asked a very well-known American improviser who does in German style. Oh gosh, I don't know his name. You tell me a few improvisers. Porter. Bill Porter. And we sent him the recordings, and he had to send us his comments, and that was the first master I was doing. And afterwards, Emanuel was my assistant. We had a few other masters, Markus Schwenkreis, Nicola Kumer. And after a time, they were all teaching everybody. Everybody had to learn improvisation in the Schola. That was great. That was a marvelous thing. And of course, some of them were not terribly quick in it, but they always understood a bit more what is actually happening. We had our
Dr. Lutz, in the classical world, classical improvisation doesn't exist. If we're going to be frank. And so, did you experience any pushback, or did people tell you this is not really this is not, or did you just ignore all of that?
I ignored it, but I think it was the time where people realized it is something which misses. And studying, of course, at a school like the Schola, which really tries to find the connection with the way people made music in the 16th, and the 17th, and the 18th century, they realized that, of course, they built it up on improvisation. An organist hadn't to play for an examination pieces, but he had to make a fugue, he had to make a choral prelude, he had to make modulations, and that was, if you think of Weckmann in Hamburg and things like that, or in Matheson in Hamburg for the organists. Examinations they had to show that they were able to improvise, and so I think the acre was fairly ready to be plowed,
right?
And so we could sort of build it up. People admired also our work, and it was like founding a little jazz school. And we had also connections with the jazz school. We had them as our tutors, and they of course said, guys, you have to improvise, it's the only thing you want to do. And of course they do it the whole day. And so we said, aha. And of course, if I had a class which was able to play a fugue on stage, I had even violin players who came and studied. And I remember I had one, Mathieu Camilleri, he could play fugues, and also Mara Miribung, the cello player, made fugues and suites and things. And of course, people that had, of course, an incredible impression about it. I think the Schola, in the moment now, it was about 25 years I could work there, really has a reputation as a place where musicians do that.
We touched on Baroque, Galant music. Does improvisation in classical music extend to, like you mentioned, Brahms, Debussy, Stravinsky? Can you have improvisation in those more quote-unquote advanced harmonic styles?
Absolutely. I say if you want to try to do it in a Brahms or Schumann style, you have to have a good Baroque and classical education in harmony and in voice leading, in models, in cadences, and in formal rhetorical way, and then you can sort of expand about it. I mean, you just have to study the music. Of course, Brahms is very hard. And you can't copy Schumann, you can't copy Brahms, you also can't copy Bach, you can't copy anything really, because it's the personal way of the treatise of the way they use the material, and that's a question of personality, the personal style. And I think the most interesting thing is I write a lot of stuff in the Bachian style, but everybody who knows me a bit says, well, it can't be Bach. It sounds like it, but it's Rudi Lutz. It's his own style.
Right. And
I've sort of developed my original tone, my capability of expressing myself in style, and I think it's possible of developing one's own classical. I mean in a very wide and broad manner. You can develop your own style, and perhaps even your own styles. What I mistrust is if somebody says, I can play in any style you want to. I can also do that. If people say Stravinsky, I just do something. If somebody says play like Rachmaninoff, I do something. If people say do something like Arvo Pärt, I do something. But it's just a little bonbon, a few things which sound like it. It's
cliches.
More like if I say, yes, I could say speak Italian, and I would say spaghetti, and amore. I know 3 words, and then it sounds like Italian, but it's not Italian. If I want to be able to really improvise in a language, in a musical language, I have to learn this language like I learn a language, like a real language, as a spoken language. It's exactly the same. It takes about the same time. And it takes me a long time, but I have to have an endurance and a permanent energy that I want to be able to speak Portuguese or Chinese or anything else.
Okay, so now I have a next question. Is we know like Mozart composed symphonies at a very young age. Like, can you learn to improvise and compose even if you start later in life, like an adult?
Yes. I had a few students who started very late. And of course, they were mature in knowing that things to learn is hard. And I just have to find very good methods about it. I learned it with my own non-method. And then I developed methods with my students, and especially with my assistant students who were afterwards professors too. They were sometimes so much better in methods as me. I have sometimes learned by their methods. And we wrote, by the way, an incredible book called Compendium on Improvisation. Sorry to say it's not yet...
Is it translated?
It's not translated, and that's the problem out of it. So you have to read it in German. It's a huge 400-page book.
Wow.
We did a huge work. We worked on years on it, and I think it would be a very important thing to try to... We would really have to have a sponsor who says, I think it's very necessary to have the money for a good translation. It's not easy to translate these things, but it's a real method. It not only understands the sources and the treatises of the time, but it tries to give exercises and it gives comments, a lot of musical examples, methods about things I was telling you now. Actually, that's what we have been doing in the last 25 years.
Let's have a little fun now. I'm going to ask you some hot seat questions. These are not serious, so you just have fun with your answers. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick questions, just like top 3 this, top 3 that. Okay, so here we go. All right, what are your top 3 Bach preludes?
For organ or for piano?
Do one for organ, do one for piano.
Okay, so I must be quick. I would say the B minor for the organ, what's the S dur? That's a E flat major. I love very much, and the C major, the pa da da ti 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 pam pam pim pam pim pam pim. Those are the 3 for organ, and now for the preludes. For piano pieces by Bach. Oh, of course, the Goldberg I love. Oh dear. You bring the B flat minor. In the Wohltemperierte Klavier. And what shall we say? It's terrible. The more I think, the more I...
You're missing out a few good ones, yeah.
That one, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, that one, that one. One which came into my mind is the E major invention in da dee da da dee da dee dee ba ba da bum ba da dee ba da dee ba da dee. It's so grazioso. But after I've hang up. I'll hang up the phone. I will say, I
missed that one.
Didn't think of the right one.
Oh, okay. How about now? Top 3 Bach fugues.
Fugues. The D minor.
Yep.
I think it's still a great piece, but we're not even sure if it's from Bach, but I think it's a lovely one. Then, of course, the G minor, and then the next fugue. I love, of course, in the Passacaglia, the ta pi pa pi ti ti pa pi da 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 da. With a counterpoint. I think that's a tambour for Buxtehude in the Passacaglia.
Okay, you guys at the JS Foundation are doing all the vocal works. But this is a tough one. The top 3 cantatas.
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah. Normally, I would say the one I'm just working on.
The latest
one
one.
of my favorite, the latest one. But if I would say three, I think 170 I love very much. The Yam pam pim da 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 ding ding di la da 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 di di da di 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 beliebte Seelenlust and vergnügte, what is it called? 170 anyway. The Kreuzstab, of course, I love very much. The Ich will den Kreuzstab gerne tradi di da. What shall I say? Sometimes there are magical pieces also cantata movements in the cantatas, which I just say, that's one I would like to. If I would have to choose the 12 pearls, I would take that. But let me quickly say a third lovely cantata. Morgenstern, BWV 1. Wie schön leuchtet der Morgenstern.
Right.
It's a terrible question.
I'm sorry. Let's move to the next one. Okay. You have to choose one only. Okay, so the English suites, the French suites, or the partitas?
I would take the partitas.
And why?
Because I haven't played them yet.
That's a good answer.
I've heard them. I'm a lucky beaver, yeah. I say they're lovely pieces, and I played the others. I liked them very much, but those I would say take them that I've got the possibility to study them.
Okay, so if we put you in a time machine and you actually could meet Bach, and what would you talk about? And would you ask what questions would you ask him?
I think I would take a number of my own compositions, Landsgemeinde Cantate we were mentioning, that Luther piece, and I would say, could you have a look at that and tell me how I could proceed in going on composing. Perhaps I would bring in my new recording of the John's Passion and say, I think I understood a lot about it. What do you think about my interpretation? And could you give me a few hints? I would ask him as a coach, of course. And I think I would be happy to play the harpsichord and give him my orchestra and choir and say, could you please conduct from the organ?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a crazy question, but you have to choose one. Piano, harpsichord, or organ?
Piano.
And why?
Well, I think it's still the love of my heart. You can express yourself. Do you know I wrote a transcription of the Chaconne for piano? Perhaps you would have a listen on that.
Yes, of course.
I've also got a score. Edna Stone, the Belgian prime pianist, she sort of played that piece, and I knew she was one of the best pianists I ever knew. And so I wrote a piece. I'm not quite sure if I could write it, but I gave everything into that piece. And the singing of a great Steinway gives me an incredible good feeling.
Who are your top three composers?
Yeah, B. I would say Bach. Beethoven, Brahms, and Britten. No, I can't Bach with it. Mozart, I feel very unhappy if I don't mention him, but I would say it's Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms.
Okay, now what's your proudest musical moment?
I was in Tokyo. In the Musa Hall, I played Samuel Barber, the Toccata Festival. It's a damn difficult piece. I think it's the most difficult piece I ever played. The cadence is only pedals with sometimes four voices. I was allowed to play that with the Tokyo Symphony Orchestra, which is a very magnificent orchestra, and I had very little time to rehearse. I was 40 meters away from the orchestra. I had to do everything with earphones, and I succeeded to play the piece in a really, I would say, fine manner. And that was a moment where I would say, quite proud of myself.
You mentioned jazz in another interview on the Bach Foundation YouTube. Do you listen to jazz improvising? Do you have your favorite jazz pianists?
Well, I think I love Ola Hines. I think Art Tatum is an incredible pianist. I like very much singers. So lady singers, jazz singers. Of course, Ella, I think, is incredible. And Billie Holiday, too. I love to listen to that, the scatting of great jazz singers.
Wonderful. And okay, so for the final question, it would be, if you could change music education, what reforms would you enact, or what things would you emphasize in learning music?
I would have a center building where you only improvise. You would do groups, you would have chamber music in sort of styles, you would do folk music, you would do modern improvisation, you would do all sorts of improvisation. From this inner circle of education, you would go out and go to the harmony house, you would go to the rhythm house, you would study groove, you would do basso continuo in another place, you would learn inner voices, you would learn ornamentation, you would also learn pieces, you would learn phrasing, you would learn piano playing, you would learn your main instrument as a real normal education, but you would always go back to the house of improvisation and bring that into the improvisation. You will go to the theory classes from the inner circle of the educational house. So the hot moment of education would be improvisation. 4 years, not 4, but 5, 6, 7, 8 years. You would always go back, and then you would go out again. You would always go back. You would always say it's this pace from this pathway from doing yourself, from the composition, going to do that what Bach himself did, that what Mozart himself did. They were playing their own pieces, they composed their own pieces, they were copying pieces from colleagues, they were playing it, they were performing it, they were improvising. It's this circulation, and I think if one would do this, people, after a few years or perhaps decades, they would be completely different musicians.
I really agree. And well, Dr. Lutz, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I must thank you for the art you've made, your incredible excellence in musicianship, your dedication to your craft, and your wonderful insights into music education. It's a beautiful model for musicians everywhere to follow. And I really hope the culture of music is really influenced by your work. And I think it would be a really hugely positive impact onto the culture of music. And so I thank you once again, and I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
It was also a great pleasure for me, and thank you for the great interest you have in music education. I'm thoroughly excited about it. I think we've got the same idea in Singapore and in St Gallen.
Thank you so much for listening to this interview. I'm so honored to be able to talk to all of my guests. They are the best in the business. If you enjoyed the show, I'd really appreciate if you shared it on social media and hit subscribe for future guests. Check out nikhilhogan.com for updates on my upcoming book, Why Children Quit Music, and check out songbirdmusicacademy.com for free resources on how to learn music. Thanks again, and I'll see you at the next show.